Again, just make myself at home. How's everyone's week been? Fabulous? Good to hear. I've had a great week. Been absolutely awesome, my week this week. Anyone know why? I've been bacheloring it for the week. Catherine and Manny were down at down at Eden visiting her family for the week, so I've been doing it tough at home by myself. And I was speaking to someone the other day, and they were going, "So how's it all going? You keeping okay?" I said, "Absolutely. I haven't seen a vegetable all week." So anyway, that's how my week's been. But today we're going to continue in our Christmas series, and we started this a couple of weeks ago. The first week we looked at Mary, and we learnt from Mary that she had great faith in God and God's plans. And although following God and God's plans was a big risk for Mary in her cultural situation and how women were seen and the complete surrounds of her situation, doing what God asked her to do was actually a really big risk. But she did it anyway because she trusted God and followed God. And then last week we looked at the Magi, and we looked at how the Magi strove to want to worship Jesus, worship the new King, and the journey they took to do that. And so today what we're going to look at is Herod. We're going to do a bit of a change of pace and have a look at Herod and Herod's response to Jesus and how Jesus impacted Herod. And Herod was an interesting guy, as hopefully you'll see today. Everyone thinks of the word Herod and person Herod and they go, "Oh, he's bad." And he did a lot of evil things, which we're going to look at. But he's an interesting character, so join me in prayer and then we're going to get started. Father, I pray that today as we look at your word and we look at what we can learn from Herod's response to Jesus, that you will challenge us, that you will speak to us, and you will help us to become the people you want us to be, so that we can know you deeper and know you more and grow as you desire, Lord. For you know all things, and we thank you for this in your Son's name. Amen. Anyone know what month it is? Month of December? It is Christmas month. There's something else going on in December. What was that? It's the last month of the year. Pardon? Oh, it may have that. Maybe. Three birthdays. Actually, there's 4 birthdays in December from this church, but no, that's not it. And I'll give you another hint. I told you one thing that December was 2 weeks ago when we looked at Mary, and it's not that. Advent? According to my Advent calendar, Christmas was last week. 2 weeks ago we said that December is International Human Rights Month, where we celebrate and think about universal human rights. And that's not applicable to today. Today, December, also is Give Thought to Vision Month. Give Thought to Vision Month, where it's challenged and reminded about the literally 2.2 billion people in the world today who have a vision impairment or who are blind, according to World Health Organization. That's not a made-up figure in my head. That's World Health's figure. 2.2 billion people in the world today. That's 25%. That's 1 in 4 people have an issue with their eyes and how they see, which is astronomical, don't you think? And as we look at Herod today, we're going to see someone who had perfect vision, yet was completely blind. Completely blind. And it's quite interesting, Herod. As I've said, Herod is a very dividing figure. And there's a few Herods in the Bible and throughout the early church. So before we get into looking at Herod's response to Jesus, we need to work out which Herod are we talking about. So we're talking about Herod the Great, Herod the King. He was born in about 79 BC, give or take, and he came to power. He was appointed by the Roman Senate as king in about 40 to 39 BC. He died in 4 BC, and he was the Herod that was alive when Jesus was born. As Doug covered last week with the calendars, the reason for the calendar mix-up, and you would think Jesus was born in the year 0, wouldn't you? But the reason for the mix-up is actually a number of centuries ago, someone did a whole whack of maths to work out the calendars, and they based it all around Jesus. And then they forgot to include leap years and other such. There were errors in their mathematical judgment. And so a couple of centuries later, when they found out that the gentleman who actually came up with the calendar and put Jesus' birth at year 0 actually was out. And so Jesus, we believe, was actually born in about 6 BC, 5 to 6 BC somewhere. And Herod the Great was king when Jesus was born. Now, he had a couple of problems when it came to the Jews. The Roman Senate appointed him for a start. That was one problem. Another problem was his mother had Arabic blood. So she wasn't a Jew, and his father was from Edom. If you think back into the Old Testament, he was an Edomite. So at no point did he have Jewish blood, which, if you know your Old Testament at all, you will know that's a problem, because the Jews were very loyal to someone from David's line sitting on the throne. And Herod wasn't dumb. Herod knew that he did not have David blood. In fact, he didn't even have Jewish blood in him. And so should someone from David's line ever come along, Herod knew he was in trouble. And so Herod approached this problem in 2 ways. Firstly, he was quite ruthless. But secondly, he spent a lot of money on trying to buy the Jews' favour. He expanded the temple greatly and made it a massive, beautiful temple. He also did a number of other building projects, which we're not going to go into today, but they were astronomical. They were incredible for that time, and with that limited technology, to build what he built, including a seaport, was unheard of, yet he did it. So he does have some good things, and he was a very smart man, and he knew how to play the political game very well. The Roman Empire was a ruthless empire, and unless you knew how to play the political game well, you didn't get very far. And Herod was on the throne for 35 years. That's a long time. That means he's no dummy. Now, Herod, as I've also alluded to, was a very brutal man. And towards the end of his reign, he became more and more worried that someone within his own family was going to overthrow him. And so he had one of his wives and 2 of his sons murdered. He was a brutal man. And when he eventually died, Emperor Augustus actually said that it would have been safer to be a pig in Herod's farm than to be one of his family. That's not some joker, that's the emperor himself saying that it would have been safer to be a pig on Herod's farm than to be one of his family. That's how brutal this man was, especially towards the end of his life, because he became very worried that someone was going to murder him and overthrow him. So what happened after he died was there were two sons, both named Herod. Herod Archelaus and Herod the Tetrarch. Okay? Herod Archelaus took over 3 of the 4 regions that Herod the Great was king over. 3 of the 4. There was Judah, Samaria, and Edom. Okay? That was Herod Archelaus. When he was appointed king, the Roman emperor at the time actually withheld confirmation of his kingship. And what the emperor said was, I'm going to withhold this until you prove yourself worthy of the kingship. Worthy that you are good to rule. This is Herod the Great's son. Apple don't fall far from the branch. You know how he celebrated his confirmation, his rise to power? He murdered 3,000 prominent citizens as a celebration of him coming to power. He only lasted a couple of years. The confirmation never came. The Roman emperor never confirmed him as king after celebrating his rise to power with killing 3,000 prominent citizens. His brother, Herod Antipas, Herod the Tetrarch, he took over the 4th section, the 4th region, Galilee. Okay? He was the Herod who was around when Jesus was on trial. Okay? And so when we get to the point today where we talk about Joseph escaping to Egypt and then coming back from Egypt, it was Herod Antipas, the one who took over the 3 from 4, where Joseph was afraid to go. And Joseph actually went to Herod the Tetrarch's region because that was safer. Anyone see the irony there? He was the safer one to go to, yet he was the one who presided over Jesus' trial 30 years later. Interesting little facet. So today we're going to focus on Herod the Great. We're going to focus on Herod the Great, the father of the 3 of them. And there's other Herods that go on beyond that, but they're completely irrelevant to what we're going to be focusing on today. So there's a bit of background so we know who we're talking about. Now, if we come to today's passage, we're focusing on Herod. And Herod's response in verse 3 and 4 to the news that there was a new king in the line of David concerned him. Why? Because he knew he was not the king. He knew he had no right to the Jewish throne. But it also says, if you noticed, and all Jerusalem with him were disturbed. Anyone ideas why Jerusalem might be disturbed if Herod's disturbed? Layman's terms, they're freaking out because they know that if Herod starts getting too disturbed, people are going to die. And so Jerusalem's freaking out because Herod's not too happy, because there is a king who is rightfully due the throne. So then we go down to verses 5 to 8, and he calls together the people to get a confirmation on these prophecies and what's going on. And it was unlikely to have been the full Sanhedrin, the full ruling party. It would have been more likely an ad hoc group of scholars and experts who could give him a quick answer rather than calling the full Sanhedrin. The reason for that is he didn't get along with the full Sanhedrin, which doesn't come as a great shock. But he didn't really get along with the full Sanhedrin. They didn't like him, he didn't like them. And so it would have been just a quick ad hoc, I need an answer, what's this talking about? And they talk about the prophecy. And some scholars have suggested, well, okay, they found out that this new king was born in Bethlehem. And so he sends the Magi off to worship and say, come back so I can worship too. And why didn't he send some soldiers with the Magi? Is a question that has been raised. And the reason is widely thought that it would have made it very hard for a group of Magi and soldiers to find any baby, because everybody would have known what's going on. Herod may have been leader, but he wasn't overly subtle. Everybody in Bethlehem would have known what was going on here. And secondly, the Magi would have had no real reason to doubt Herod's instructions that he wanted to go worship the baby, the king. Everyone in Israel would have known exactly what Herod was going to do. But foreigners who had never really had any contact with him before, they wouldn't have known. They wouldn't have suspected anything. They would have thought, okay, he's going to go worship a baby. Not a problem. And it wasn't until God warned them in the dream to go home a different way that they went, oh, okay, we better go home a different way. So that's why he just simply sent them on their way and said, come back to me so I can worship, knowing full well what he had in mind. So then we jump down to verse 13 to 15. And we read that after the Magi had gone, God appears to Joseph in a dream and says, scram, get out of here, get down to Egypt. Now, why would God have sent Joseph to Egypt, other than the fact that Herod was about to try and kill all the babies, which we'll get to in a second? Why would he pick Egypt? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's outside of Herod's jurisdiction. There's nothing Herod can do. Even if Herod knew that's where they went, there is absolutely not a cracker that Herod can actually do to Joseph, Mary, or Jesus while they're in Egypt. And so it was a very safe place. And the fact is that it also mirrors something else. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to what came out of Egypt? There's a hint, about 1,500 years earlier. The Israelites. And so when Jesus comes back out of Egypt eventually, it's reflecting what the Israelites did 1,500 years earlier. They came out of Egypt. And so Jesus, and if you look back, and Matthew's a great book for this, is you see Matthew continually comparing Jesus and Jesus' events and Jesus' life and what Jesus is doing with the Jews. And where the Jews fail and fail and fail and fail right through the Old Testament, just like we do today. Let's not pick on the Israelites without being fair. We fail just as much as they fail. But as we look through and see how the Israelites fail and fail and fail and fail, Jesus does what? Succeed, 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 succeed. Jesus does what the Jews couldn't do. And Jesus does what we can't do. And so there's two primary reasons why Joseph was sent with Jesus and Mary down to Egypt when Herod was going to kill all the babies. So we come to the killing, and it's quite a brutal sort of scene, and over the years we've built it up to a brutal sort of scene. You want to know how many babies in reality was actually probably murdered? Most scholars tend to agree. And you won't find this pretty much in any secular history textbook of the time. That's right. Absolute maximum would have been about 40. About 40 baby boys under the age of 2. Now we sit here today and go, murdered 40 baby boys, how dare you? Absolutely. It's grotesque, it's horror, it's wrong, it's all those adjectives, whichever ones you want to put in. But understand that in a brutal empire, at a brutal time, where bloodshed was considered quite fine, really, especially if it's not yours, for 42-year-old boys to be murdered in a backward corner of the empire, which is what Palestine was. It was really a backward corner. It certainly wasn't anywhere close to being considered important in the Roman Empire scheme of things. For 40 baby boys to be murdered, historians go, that's not even worth talking about. Okay, now, as I said, we look at it today and go, that's just horrible. That's wrong. But in the scheme of things, we're talking about 30 or 40 boys that Herod murdered in order to try to protect himself, not knowing, obviously, that Jesus had out to Egypt. But we notice, if you notice, there's a prophecy, and Matthew loves putting prophecies in, and bits of passages from the Old Testament. And it says, a voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. Now, that's actually from Jeremiah 31. And after it, the context of that is, where are we? 31. 31:15. No, one more page back. But what the context is after that is hope. It then starts, Jeremiah then starts to talk about the people coming back. People coming back from exile, people coming back into the right relationship that they were designed to have with their God. It's not this is the end of the line, terrible wrap-up of the story. This is the beginning of a new and better relationship that is going to happen. There is hope there. And that's what, that's the context. And isn't it true? Okay, well, we have this terrible situation where 40 baby boys have been murdered. Jesus has been taken away to Egypt. But is that the end of the story? Is that where it all wraps up? No. That's just the beginning. That's just the beginning. Jesus comes back. He grows. He begins his ministry. And what does he do in his ministry? Throughout 3.5 years, he shows he is the Son of God. Now, next year, we're starting in January, and we're going to go through January and February. We're going to ask the question, who is Jesus? And we're going to go through the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to look at different aspects of Jesus' nature and his life, and ask, who is Jesus? How does this point us to understand Jesus better? That's what we're doing January and February of next year. But what do we do with this? Okay, so Jesus challenges Herod because Jesus forces Herod to actually look at the truth. Jesus, by Jesus merely coming, because we're talking about baby Jesus at the moment, we're talking about Herod the Great. How does Jesus' arrival on earth at all impact Herod? Well, it challenges Herod because it forces Herod to understand that you are not ultimate authority. You like to think you are, you like to think you have all the power, but you don't. So how does that affect us? What can we do with that? As we go into the week leading up to Christmas, how do we apply that? Make any sense out of that for ourselves? Silence is deafening. Just like you asked your 7-year-old son to clean up his room. Silence is deafening. As he slinks away out the backyard and pretends he didn't hear you. Well, let me put it this way. Jesus coming impacts Herod the same way his coming should impact us. Because we are Herod. We like to think we're in charge. We like to think we're boss. And we like to think that we're most important. And we make decisions based on what's important to us, where we derive our priority and our values from. It's amazing how many times people go, oh, I don't have the time to do this, or I don't have the time to do that, or if only I could find more time to help in this ministry, or go to that prayer meeting, or do whatever. And you go, okay, not a problem. And then you go home and you see that person has spent 3 hours on Facebook. It's not they didn't have the time. And I pick on Facebook because Facebook's easy to pick on, but we all do it in our own different ways. What we do is we give priority to the things we prioritise, the things we value, the things that are important to us. We all have the time to do whatever. We all have the money to do whatever. We have it. It's what we prioritise. And Herod holds a mirror up to us because Herod prioritised himself. He prioritised his power, his control, him being in charge. No one's allowed to question Herod. That's what Herod wanted. That's what Herod desired. And so when Jesus came, Jesus posed a threat to that, and he knew it. And so he tried to take out the threat. As we come into Christmas this week, let me ask you, what's most important to you? What is your number one priority? What is your number 2 priority? What is your number 3 priority? Because number 3 priority takes priority over number 5. But number 5 will take priority over number 8. What is most important to you? So now, this can be about, we can make it about whatever we want to make it about. We can make it about money. We can make it about our job. We can make it about our friends. We can make it about our standing in society. We can make it about how other people see us. We can make it about whatever we want to make it about. What's most important to you? You becoming a church? Awesome. That's okay. What is most important? Because if God comes first in our lives, if we want to honestly stand somewhere or sit and say, God is most important to me, well, you know what? It's really easy for me to know if that's true. How? Not because I'm a mind reader, but because I'll watch your decisions. Your decisions will reflect your priorities. My decisions reflect my priorities. I'm no better. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but all of our decisions reflect our priorities. And if our priorities are that TV or comfort or money or whatever is more important than God, then our decisions will reflect that. It doesn't matter how many times you say, God is most important, I love God, God's the greatest, God's most number one to me. If that's not what's reflected in our decisions. Now, Jesus talks about you can't serve both God and money, but we can replace that word money with absolutely anything we want to replace it with. We can replace it with job, we can replace it with ego, we can replace it with time, we can replace it with how other people see us, our reputation. What is most important to you? Herod shows us today, as we look at Herod's life and Herod's decisions, that what was most important to Herod was power. Unquestioned, unoverturnable power. And the second someone came along who was born in the line of David, who had right to the throne, what did he do? His priorities were shown in his decisions. His decisions were, I'm going to remove the threat. I'm going to protect myself. I'm going to do all these unethical things. Why? Because my priorities are me. Where are your priorities? This Christmas, we're a week out from Christmas. You know what that means? We're only 372 days from Christmas 2023. But this week, ask yourself, what do I say is most important in my life? And what do my decisions reflect? I was listening to a sermon this week by Andy Stanley. It's a great sermon. It's a 6-part series. I like Andy. And at one point he says, and it's quite a brutal sermon actually, but at one point he says, to know and not do. And we've all done it, and we all have kids who have done it. You ask them to do something, and I know. Well, go do it. I know, you don't have to tell me. And he says, and we've all said it to our parents as well over time, I know. And Andy Stanley says, to know and not do is to not know. There's one description for that. To know and not do is to not know, but to think you know when you're not doing, that's called self-deception. And there's nothing more pitiful than deceiving yourself. There's only you inside your head. And as you're sitting there now and listening to what I'm saying, I can't hear what you're saying. The person next to you can't hear what you're thinking in your head. They might be digging an elbow into your ribs going, you need to listen. But it's just you and you inside your head. And God already knows what you're thinking anyway, so you're not going to surprise him. Be honest with yourself. Where are your priorities? If God's not number one priority, then at least have the decency to be honest with yourself about it. You don't have to be honest to me. You don't have to be honest to anyone else in the room, but at least be honest to yourself. And that's what Herod challenges us today to do. Be honest with ourselves as to where we put God and where we put Jesus. Let's pray. Father, we thank you that you are the great God. We thank you that you do know us. You know us even better than we know ourselves. And yet because of your grace and because of your love and because that you care for us in such a way that we can't even understand the depths of, you sent your Son to build a way back so we can have the relationship with you that you desired. And I pray that you will speak to each one of us today and that through this, we will make you number one. We will give you what you deserve. Number one priority in our lives. And so I pray to you for that, and I ask you that you will help us to do that in your Son's name. Amen.